Okay, this is the beginning of 8.4, Life in Industrialized Society. So this is for the quiz 8.4.3, which is the first quiz in 8.4. So this is starting to talk about what life was like for people who lived in nations that had been industrialized. So remember, industrialized nations basically means that um, urbanization was happening where people are flocking to the cities and factories were being built in large numbers so that things could just be producing left and right out of there quick, make things quick, and they're cheaper, more affordable, and that you can make a lot more of everything that was made in these factories because you have machines to make them, and so you can make a lot more of them. um, so the class that really benefited the most was not just specifically the upper class. Oh, sorry, my allergies are getting me. Um, but also the middle class. So this is a new class. The middle class and the working class were both new classes that had first come into place during the Industrial Revolution. Because at first it was just like you're really, really rich and you're noble, or you're one of the peasants. So it's kind of like the opposite extremes. But once industrialization started, you're now having not just like a super poor, but working class and a middle class. And so the difference is the middle classes, they were educated, so they have more educated professions like doctors and nurses and teachers and um, business owners. And then you have the working classes that they don't have the education for that, but they have at least some skills and they have a job. They're not like the bottom line, but they do pretty well, or good enough. Working class didn't have great working conditions that we're going to talk about. So the middle class really prospered because their wages were were rising. Their standard of living, which is how much stuff they have, kind of, and how great their lives are, that was rising. On the other hand, for people who are poor, the working classes, cities were getting horrible. It was trashy. There was garbage. There was pollution everywhere from the factories. The the government services with trash and cleaning water and pollution, they couldn't keep up with that growth of population because it's just rising too fast and they just can't keep up with it. Plus, for the people in the working class, they had to work long hours for very little pay. They did get paid more, so definitely keep that in mind. They did get paid more than they used to, but they also worked longer hours and in horrible conditions as compared to what they were used to. So, yeah, they got paid more, but for at what cost? So social inequality was rampant because you have people at a very high end and people at a very low end. Of course, you have a lot of extremes, but what industrialization did was it took a lot of people who would have been low or middle and like pushed them high, and it really made the working class just expand. Because of the agricultural revolution that we talked about in past units, the more factories or machines in the farms to help. So you didn't need to have as many workers in the farms. So they all lost their jobs. So they all moved to the city, right? Part of urbanization. So because of that, people losing their jobs, not having money, the mortality rate or the death rate increased. And what also is interesting is the fertility rate increased, which means that people had more kids at first, before industrialization was over. Once industrialization was over, then the fertility rate dropped again. But it increased at the beginning of industrialization. One thing that happened with the overcrowded cities, I'm going to show you guys something. Here's a picture of a factory in the 1800s. This is just one of the pictures. So you'll see lots of young men, children even. This is a child. Here's a child. I mean, honest, all of these guys look like children or, teenagers and younger. So the best thing about young workers in factories is you can have them fit into tight spaces that, grown-sized men couldn't. So that was a huge thing, that they could do. Running things back and forth, messages to other sides of the building. They were good for that. So you can see the horrible working conditions that they were in. I mean, having to deal with all this stuff all day long. Look at this guy's shirt. There's holes in it. These guys had one or two pairs of clothes. Um, these guys are the working class right here. Okay. Next picture I'm going to show you is this one. This is, I like this one. These are public outhouses. So there's a lot of people who they couldn't afford, when they moved to the cities, they couldn't afford to live anywhere. A lot of apartments were built, especially one-room apartments were built. A lot of people started living in people's unfinished basements because they needed somewhere to stay. But so a lot of these places, and some people just built houses in the streets, in the alleys. They just built what they could next to a building, and that's where they lived. And so this is a public outhouse because a lot of people did not have toilets inside their house, much less their own restroom inside their house. So this public outhouse was very common. It's so funny. Nobody ever really cleaned these. These are they're just left there, so they stink. There's diseases, there's animals, all sorts of nasty stuff, as you can imagine. And with the stench and smell and uncleanliness, it got so bad that one year in 1858, the stink was so bad, they called it the Great Stink of 1858 because it permeated everywhere, the whole city. They even had to use a special bleach on the curtains in Parliament to get the smell out. Like literally, the smell went into every person's home. That's how horrible it was. So it's just super dirty, super gross in these cities because no one has any idea how to keep things clean, and they don't know about diseases and washing. They don't know about that stuff yet, or they don't think it's important, rather. So you can look on the internet, and there's so many primary sources. We've talked about this before, right? Primary sources, first-hand accounts that talk about how horrible the pollution is, how dirty the streets are. They talk about not being able to see. It looks constantly dark inside. Like someone said in London that it looked constantly dark because of all of the smog and pollution that was in the air from all the factories. That's no bueno, right? That's disgusting. That would have environmentalists today going crazy if that happened today. Luckily, it doesn't. We don't have to deal with that. But it was rampant. Any industrialized city, you're going to see lots and lots of pollution. Lots of it. So let's see. Child labor happened at this time. As you saw in that picture, there are teenagers. There's kids who work even as young as 5, 6, which is way, 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 way too young. But they did have child labor happening. The children would work the same hours, the same length of the day, but for much less pay. And lots of times that pay would go directly to their fathers and not to them. They would always be just paying to help pay the bills for their family. Let's see. Working class women were in factories. Middle and upper class did not have to work. They were able to stay at home as caretakers, or women or moms, full-time moms at the house. Upper class women had the time because they sometimes had enough money to pay for a maid to help them clean the house or take care of the kids. So they had some extra time to go out and do charities. And one of the best things that they did was they advocated for poor conditions for the poor. So it's kind of funny. You think of wealthy people as snobs and people who don't really care about those who are poor. But a lot of these social movements, these reform movements that happen to make things better for people in the cities and for the poor, make their working conditions better, were started by wealthy women because they had a little bit extra time on their hands, and they saw how horrible it was for them, and they advocated for them. So, without these wealthy women, I don't know how long it would have taken, or how different the story would have been for people who were poor. So things started getting better. Governments start, doing things to make things cleaner. You have governments who put in a tax to make drinking water cleaner. Try to filter the bacteria out of it. And people didn't really want to pay taxes, but they're like, oh, if it means that less people get sick and die, we'll take it. So they have things like that. They started getting ideas to just keep things more clean and pasteurize things. We have this guy named Louis Pasteur, who comes up with this idea that you need to heat things in order to kill the bad bacteria, to pasteurize it, to make it clean. So here's a picture of the pasteurization method for milk here. So, that's just one of the, that's the most common form of pasteurization. That's what we think of as pasteurizing milk. Other things are pasteurized as well, but this gets people thinking of, okay, we need to get rid of bad bacteria in order to get it clean. So whatever that means, to get rid of bad bacteria. He's the guy who thought about that, who, cleaning our stuff before we actually put it in our bodies. So that was great for him to do. Okay, so last point for 8.4.3 is, so all these issues, uncleanliness, horrible working conditions, even have miners, people who worked in the mine, they had little ventilation. They were breathing all this nasty stuff all day long. So their lungs were inhaling all this stuff. And a lot of them had horrible health problems. Some people got so sick that they were not able to work anymore, even after 10 years of working. I saw there's stories of people, and there's one story that shared on Apex about a young woman who worked, and her health got so bad that she couldn't support herself anymore. She couldn't work. Nobody would take her, and she just had to work in the working house to try to, get by. So it's horrible, the effects. So all these horrible things that are happening in these factories with the pay, the long hours, the children, the meaning for strikes, the unsanitation, the dangerous jobs, no workers' compensation, unions sometimes are not very popular or could do anything. So all of these things led to social reform. So that's when people really started advocating, okay, we need to start changing things. We need to make life better, because this is horrible what these people are going through. So we need to make things better for them. So this is a problem because in other past videos we've talked about capitalism, Adam Smith's idea that government should not be involved at all in business and corporate. They should just, laissez-faire, hands-off approach, not put their hands on it and regulate business. So this is kind of going against that, because they're saying, well, maybe the government should regulate it just a little bit so that these horrible working conditions aren't, things that stay. People should not have to work in these horrible working conditions. So maybe this is completely no government regulation. Maybe let's pull back a little bit, and then maybe that will raise the standard of living for the poor people. So that's it for 8.4.3.